The Walking Dead is a fucking miracle.
Yay! 10 years in the making, everybody. Is it 11 now? It might be 11 years. 11 years. Whatever it is. A long time in the making, but finally.
I could probably just end that part there and save us all an hour or so, but I guess I won't do that. Disclaimer, this video is an Disclaimer, this video is an excerpt of my near 12-hour long video in which I cover most but not all of the games by Telltale Games, in a somewhat critical but hopefully mostly conversational manner where I essentially just do a boring plot rundown and make surface level analysis. You know how it goes. Probably good to have on in the background while you're doing something else. If you enjoyed this section or care at all, that's great news for you because there is another 10 odd hours of this nonsense on my channel already to also have on in the background, oh yes. But you'll notice I'm uploading this video as a standalone because, frankly, the original video flopped hard and I'm genuinely intrigued if this will do better on its own. So I am shamelessly re-uploading part of the video as its own video to see that thing. So if you're wondering why certain gags or jokes just don't make sense outside of that just being how I make most of my videos, it's likely because the setup for them is in an entire other video. So if you enjoyed this video, consider sharing it with someone. You probably know who to share it with, and I can feel something finally. But if you live in Russia or Belarus, the video is apparently blocked for you. So sorry to all the Ruskies, the Ruskies, can I say that? Sorry to all you fellows out there. You know, as they say, no Russian in the okay, what's happened? It's funny as well because in The Walking Dead Season 2, a big part of the second half is those Russian characters coming and messing up your shit, you know, Arvo and that. So I guess maybe they didn't like the video. I do have a whole like 10-minute rant in the video section of The Walking Dead Season 2 regarding Arvo. So maybe they just, I don't know, maybe they copyright struck my video and they okay, that's enough.
Hey, nah!
Meatball. And then, where was it?
Remember when I mentioned that an episode of Wallace and Gromit was written by Sean Vanneman? Well, Sean Vanneman, Jake Rodkin, and I guess everyone at Telltale were responsible for The Walking Dead, Telltale's most iconic and beloved game ever. Probably. It's the game that properly put Telltale on the map and would come to define them as a studio, for better or worse. The impact and influence of this game is still being felt to this day, and in a lot of ways I think this game still does it the best and holds up remarkably well. Not only as a story experience, but also in lieu of this supposed illusion of choice that would come to plague Telltale's later output. I do think even amongst Telltale's catalogue that The Walking Dead is a fairly special title. I enjoy a lot, even most of the games to follow, but there really is nothing like The Walking Dead Season 1. And when conversations and claims of illusory choices arise, I actually think that the first season is mostly untouched by the criticism, where in literally the next game the problems start to show if you are unlucky enough to go against the set storyline. But for The Walking Dead, honestly, there is a plethora of surprisingly nuanced and considered design choices here that remove it from this umbrella it's often caught under. It's not even raining, why is The Walking Dead under an umbrella? And in my mind, it may actually be the only Telltale game to really deliver with their shift to storytelling and a goal of immersing you into a world where you feel like what you're doing matters and the game can react to it in a way that tricks you instead of progression through puzzles. Obviously we know it doesn't really matter, but The Walking Dead, even after multiple playthroughs, still manages to retain this sense of cohesion and mystery, this feeling that you could alter the core events when you never really were able to. They wisely bring attention to that, and the ending being the only one actually solidifies it in a really brilliant way. The only other game that I feel lives up to this design philosophy is one that actively makes fun of it because it's inherently flawed and silly, but The Walking Dead does more than enough to still feel like a real game that is flexible and reactive and explorative, managing to balance its generally maligned gameplay with its more universally beloved story, instead of just being a movie or interactive story that you play. It was the first, and it's arguably still the best. I will be mentioning a handful of moments that even I haven't seen before, despite my probably 10 playthroughs of the game, just because I find it so fascinating that the developers genuinely thought about all the different ways someone may or may not interact with the game. In a strange and subjective way though, it almost feels redundant to mention these things because the beauty of The Walking Dead is that your destination is always the same, but the journey always feels different, especially in the little things. And with this game, it's all about the little things for me. Oh.
Well, it's not the big moves, it's all about the little things. Moves are easy. Moves are easy.
That sounds like Rodney Newman, doesn't it?
Strange are happening to me.
Well done for not just going to "You've Got a Friend in Me."
Before getting into episode 1, I should mention that I'm playing the definitive edition of the game with this new graphic black art style to better match The Walking Dead's final season. I quite like it, but I'm also kind of indifferent towards it. Anyway, how fucking good is this intro sequence? I always forget. We're introduced to our protagonist Lee Everett, yes, that one, handcuffed in the back of a police car being taken to prison after committing murder. That's a hell of a way to introduce the protagonist. It's a somber and slow start that perfectly relays the dialogue-based gameplay to you, with this copper continuously ranting about Lee's case. It's also worth mentioning that the cop is familiar with Lee's parents' pharmacy, which is a nice setup. Another thing worth mentioning is that within the first 5 minutes of the game, they're already showcasing that they won't always honor or make your decision mean anything. No matter what you say, Lee will not utter it, which I think is kind of interesting and speaks to his character, since we've only just met the guy and haven't embodied him long enough to determine if it's the right thing to say. That's analysis. Eventually, police cars and helicopters flood into the city we're leaving, and there's a radio report of a riot. It puts so much intrigue into your mind. The cop ends up getting so distracted by his stories that he crashes into a walker and the two go flying off the freeway, with Lee badly injuring his leg and passing out. When we're encountered by the initial zombie or walker attack, it feels genuinely horrific. Moments later, we enter the ransacked house of who would eventually become the most iconic Telltale character ever in this young girl, Agent Superball. I mean Clementine. Though if I'm being totally honest, I'd argue that the sequels actually make Clementine a far more interesting character. Her role in this first game is good, but pretty standard, I suppose. But maybe that's not true, I don't even know, I just wrote it down. We're presented with our first choice in the whole game, and you can leave right now or wait until dark. Please don't leave. Generally, I would leave now, as it seems most people do, but narratively I actually think it's far stronger to wait until dark. Doing so will result in a very subtle change. Instead of Chet accompanying Sean, it's instead a police officer, which adds a really great moment of Lee believing he will be arrested once more. It's minor as all hell, but I think it's neat. When we arrive at Sean's farm, it also reinforces his plan to reinforce the fences, since his friend already died and his father's more likely to agree. His father's Herschel, by the way, the guy from the show, but not the exact same iteration. This game doesn't exist in the show's timeline as far as I know. Well, I'm sure when this first game was made it didn't, but they probably retroactively made it so. It's also on this farm where we meet another iconic character in Kenny and his wife Katja and son Duck, or Kenny Jr. I always forget that Kenny was a commercial fisherman, whatever that is, explaining his infatuation with boats. There's another great moment where Lee helps Sean reinforce the fence, and they have a pretty grim conversation about murder and how quickly the world seems to have gone to hell, with Sean mentioning that he saw someone just shoot a kid point blank. Wow. It's also quite funny watching Duck spaz out on the lawnmower when moments later it'll be the cause of Sean's death. Spoilers. It's a pretty fucked up death as well. You can't defend him or anything, you just watch him get eaten regardless of who you choose to save. Herschel tells us all to leave, so it's a brief stay at his farm, but definitely an unforgettable one. I know, already the illusion of choice, right? Well, I actually like that you aren't able to save every single person that is in a predicament. Sometimes there's just nothing you can do. The newly formed group end up at a pharmacy, saved by some of its current occupants in Glenn and Carly. That's also Glenn from the show, but not quite, again. After a tense argument regarding Duck potentially being bitten, a walker that was hiding in the bathroom reveals itself, which is just very funny to me given not only the gravity of the argument, but also because it's just another one of those cheesy, janky things that I appreciate from Telltale. The game is deservedly renowned for its storytelling and writing, but it's still a Telltale game at heart, and that's wonderful. Like, look how Lee trips over here, it's just really funny how clumsy he is. Anyway, you can either side with Kenny or with newly introduced Larry, who is just the biggest dickhead. Confession time. I always side with Kenny, not just here, but throughout the entirety of the game. It's kind of a problem for me, actually. Every time I replay the game, I tell myself that this playthrough will be when I finally side with Lily, Larry's daughter, but I just always end up siding with Kenny. I don't even dislike Lily. In fact, on this playthrough, I actually thought she was a pretty great and likable character, definitely not a supreme asshole like her dad. That's something this game does well, maybe omitting the supreme asshole. You never really totally hate anyone, it's always a more nuanced relationship. And that doesn't just apply to your relationships, the other characters are like that with each other as well, which makes it feel super authentic. Anyway, the argument causes Larry to have a heart attack of sorts, so we gotta get into the pharmacy next door to help him out. Some moments later, you are able to freely walk around the pharmacy and talk to the characters, and this acts as your hub area for the episode. It almost goes without saying, but the atmosphere here is on point. The music is so crooning and foreboding. You hear these occasional gunshots in the distance. It's such a great reprieve from the intense moments prior, and the game just continues to shine in that way. And while it doesn't impact the story, you can play differently. You can select the bastard dialogue option and just be a prick. You can be totally silent. You can lie to people about Lee's backstory or be honest about it. It never really changes the outcome or someone's opinion on you long term, But that's kind of true to life anyway. You don't always get a say in how someone sees you. I suppose. That's analysis. Either way, it's here where I have my first re-experience of misunderstanding a line and wishing I could undo it, as it comes off so apathetic and disrespectful when Clementine asks Lee about her parents. We also later find out that this is Lee's parents' pharmacy, and they too are dead. So there's a really great juxtaposition of sorts, with Clementine's parents presumably being dead, and Lee's parents definitely being dead. They're both going through the same thing, Clementine not even really knowing it. But luckily they have each other now. Talking on his parents, you even find Lee's younger brother whilst outside with Doug, trapped under a streetlight, and Lee suspects he will have the keys to the pharmacy. I love how Lee just managed to escape having to go to prison, but is still being constantly reminded of his actions, his family, and how he must have severed that tie in doing what he did. It weighs on him heavy throughout, I guess. Also, I love how quickly Doug says, "Okay," when you go back inside. Man is ready to leave.
Let's head back inside. Okay.
Glenn earlier went out to siphon some gas so that everyone else can leave. What a legend. But he calls on Clementine's walkie-talkie to ask for some help. Lee and Carly head to the motor inn where Glenn is hiding, Glenn requesting that we try to save a woman trapped in one of the rooms. Admittedly, you don't get a say in this, but the following sequence is actually pretty neat. Lee and Carly's double-team pillow kill is genuinely sick, as Glenn says, and the characters just continue to show their resourcefulness, namely Glenn using a piece of a spark plug to shatter this car window.
Spark plug!
When we get to the woman, she is bitten and wants to kill herself. I capitulated. Good word. I capitulated, giving her Carly's gun and staying with her to then retrieve the gun. It's another really small and insignificant moment overall. The character isn't even named, but man, it hits hard. There's also a great missable moment after this where you can talk to Glenn, and it really just hammers home what happened, and it makes the choice stick with you. You also reconvene with him at the end, where he again throws it in your face about letting the woman give up, before relenting that he wouldn't know the right call to make. It doesn't mean anything in a game-ending choices matter way, but it kinda gets under your skin. Now that we have the axe though, we can break the gate's padlock. I was really loving the pace that I was at with this episode. We're all just holed up in the pharmacy and you can check in on everyone. It feels so natural and really made me care about all of them, especially Clementine, of course. Seeing the two of them try to connect is so fucking cute. Lee asking Clementine if she's his guy, it's so good. There's another great moment where Clementine stubs her finger in the office and Lee puts a band-aid on it. It's so ordinary and mundane, but it really works. The character stuff and banter is genuinely delightful and upbeat despite the death surrounding it all. It's such a perfect balance. Anyway, Doug hatches a plan with a universal remote from Lee's parents' office and basically rewires it to activate these TVs. Lee then chucks a brick and goes to get the keys from his brother. Surprisingly, this moment with Lee's brother didn't actually hit me as hard as I expected, compared to the previous moment with a completely random woman. Though maybe that isn't a criticism, there really isn't time for Lee to fully take it in, and also his brother is already a walker where the woman was only turning, so maybe my brain just didn't react to it properly. I don't really see people talk about this moment though. We return with the keys and Lily's reaction is very exaggeratedly sexual.
God, you're amazing. Let's get in there.
I feel like I
Strawberries or
should leave after
something?
that. Just let you two crack on.
More jank, but hey, I love it. Unfortunately, they trigger the alarm and it brings a whole host of walkers. I especially love though this again little detail of one walker by a dumpster with a screwdriver in her shoulder, standing up and walking toward the pharmacy. We follow her the whole way out of the alley and it's just swarming with them. It's a great shot. Oh, and that lock got busted, so there's nothing to stop them from getting in now. You're then presented with the big choice of the episode, to save Carly or Doug. Usually I would choose Carly, and I guess some would call that the canonical choice, but this time I chose Doug and then instantly regretted it. But that's not a bad thing at all. That's what I want from these games, even after multiple playthroughs. I want to immediately feel like I just made the wrong choice, and I can't do anything about it, Doug further punctuating it by saying he wishes we'd saved her at the end. This is such a great choice because it really feels equal. It feels like either person is worth being saved, and it isn't obvious like some later choices in later games can be. Except, maybe not actually. While it's definitely good, it kind of does suffer from that same issue of later games, in that one choice is generally better overall. The choices don't feel especially balanced. And that's clearly saving Carly, because Carly knows who Lee is, so she's a reporter and followed the case, confronting Lee in his parents' office at one point. She also later in episode 3 tries to persuade Lee to tell people about it, and this adds so much depth to their relationship and Lee's character, but with Doug, you get none of that. You also don't spend nearly as much time with Doug as Carly. There is a serious gap there. A decent chunk of character shit is entirely removed depending on who you choose, and I don't know if that's a good thing or not. Carly is clearly more capable survival-wise, but Doug is a techie nerd and probably knows how batteries work. It's kind of hard to believe Telltale wanted people to choose Doug. He's modeled after an employee. But the thing is, that's kind of the game as a whole. In the moment, it's very strong and impactful, but when you really scrutinize it, it doesn't always hold up. And I don't think you could argue that your playthrough is significantly made harder by choosing Doug, since in later episodes he still serves the exact same function as Carly, just in different ways. I don't know, that's just a thought I had, and it doesn't really bother me either. These games are clearly all about that in-the-moment fast decision. Also, Lee and Doug end up having a certified bromance. I love their friendship, so I guess it's fine. In retrospect, it definitely is good that choosing Carly or Doug dramatically changes the experience, as the later games are largely the same experience throughout, where in this instance your choice ends up mattering because it actually affects and changes the characters and story. You want to feel as if your choice has a long-lasting effect, so if you chose Doug and then on replay chose Carly, you'd probably be more than pleasantly surprised to discover something entirely new that is contextual to the character. It'd feel really jarring if this whole thing from Carly was just grafted onto Doug or Larry or Lily. Anywho, the group all escape, but not before that aforementioned Walker sneaks in and grabs Clementine. It's like a fucking mini-story inside of the climax. I love it. Larry then sparks us out despite us saving his life. Thanks, mate.
When Big Larry came round just to put him down,
The Everett
turned into a clown, and no girl ever wants to dance with a fool who went and
got bitten. Ugh.
Let's never speak of the segment ever again.
Kenny will return to save you regardless, and we all retreat to the motor inn from before. You can once again talk to all the characters. Glenn decides to leave and find his friends. Doug reveals he had feelings for Carly. Clementine's walkie-talkie was broken in all the commotion. Larry reveals that he too knows who Lee really is. And the gang makes shelter until the military rolls through and saves them. And I love how the episode ends on a seemingly hopeful note before the power just goes out and things get even worse. I fucking love this episode. I know people rag on this one especially the most, but I can't lie, this is my favorite episode of the entire game and easily like top 3 of all Telltale. I fucking adore this one. It's an excellent start and perfectly lays the groundwork for later episodes to improve on those elements, but as a whole, this is just my favorite one to play. Hell of an episode. Funnily enough, episode 2 was always my favorite. Episode 1 has only become my favorite on the last 2 playthroughs, but every other time it's usually this weird non sequitur that feels more like a Monster of the Week episode than a continuation of the story. But that's totally fine because the actual story only kicks into gear at the end of this episode, so they get to have a fun and disturbing episode while also propelling the narrative. The episode begins 3 months after episode 1 though, and for some this may be a problem. I generally don't like it when episodic games do this. It's part of the reason I didn't love Life is Strange 2. Each episode felt so conclusive by the end, and like there weren't really any threads to elaborate on outside of the main plot, but it works just fine here, as mentioned. Gonna jump a bit ahead in the episode, and basically 2 men appear at the motor inn, and thanks to Doug's alarm system, we get the jump on them. They offer a trade, food for gas. They got plenty at their dairy farm, and even if you reject, you end up going anyway because, well, the episode will just end, and everyone else wants to go, so something, choices matter. I don't mind Lee's choice being disregarded though, because again, everyone wants to go. Even Lily isn't too against the idea, so it works here because of the context. You'll be hearing me say that word a lot, but maybe not in this game. We're desperate for food, so the writers have already created a scenario where even if we don't feel good about it, we kind of have to go along. On our walk to the farm, Lee and Doug have some good banter. It's insignificant but endearing. The game always takes its time to build the character dynamics. We happen upon a couple of balaclava-clad bandits, apparently the same ones who raided Ben's camp. We just picked up this here Ben Paul. Oh no. Oh no. Sean Paul. We just picked up this here Ben Paul after rescuing his teacher. Oh. Surprisingly, he didn't make it. I don't have much to say about this, but I always thought that the way Andy says, "shit, get down," was really funny. Like, it's weirdly melodic, and I just say it in like a rapping tone, whatever that means. White. Shit, get down. Oh yeah, these two are the St. John brothers, Andy and Danny. We arrive at their farm, a veritable electric fence haven, and their cow is sick. Also, new addition Mark really gets ahead of himself, proclaiming to the high heavens that we have a vet in Katja, and that the whole group could come down for dinner. Bro needs to calm down. He's going to be dinner later on.
It's going to be quite filthy. Don't ever say that again. It's going to be quite filthy.
That's a callback, everybody who didn't see last week's.
Doug and Ben then return to the motor inn to round everyone up. Now that is a deadly duo. I would not want to run into those two. Mark and Lee agree to secure the perimeter and check on their defenses, which gives way to some more good dialogue. But who cares about all that? There's a swing seat that you can fix, and I forgot to do it. So Andy does it, and it should have been me, god fucking damn it. Well, at least I did it 9 years ago. I'll come back to whatever this is near the end of the game. Younger brother Danny takes Lee out for a little reconnaissance date after Mark is attacked by bandits, finding a small camp. This entire section is incredibly disturbing, and Danny is arguably the creepiest fucking guy in the whole series. He very obviously seems to know where this camp is, a camp far too small for the bandits. There's a tent here, and Danny almost has this slight look of excitement when checking on it.
Every week.
Up the tent.
Lee finds a video camera which freaks Danny out, but the battery is dead, to which he responds, "Oh good." It's also tucked behind these boxes from the dairy farm, a part of this deal they had where the bandits would leave them alone if they gave them food. I'm not sure why it's here though, maybe it implies some sort of alliance where the bandits find food and the farm prepares it. Hell, there's even one moment when we arrive at the dairy that always felt off to me. It's where Brenda says that she prepared these biscuits especially for us this morning. The way she says it is casual and unassuming enough, but I always wondered if she was actually for real and she did make them for us specifically. Then that got me thinking about how the St. John's just stumble upon our motor inn despite us being there for months now, and it all starts to feel a little too convenient that the fence is turned on while we're patrolling. So the bandits just happen to shoot Mark in the shoulder. So the St. John's just happen to have some food to goad us in and then probably do the same to us. That's a lot of speculation, but the fact I can go so far with that is awesome to me, and I find that far more intriguing to theorize about than most things in other games in this video.
Yeah, also that rumour. Not rumour. What the hell's the... I'm still on hold. Prediction. Hypotheses. Speculation. Theory.
Go for it.
Yes.
Inside the tent, though, you find 2 sleeping bags, one of them child-sized. You may have noticed that Clementine is missing her hat, and it's because it is somehow inside this tent. A woman named Jolene then reveals herself, Danny claiming she's a bandit, but it's pretty clear to me she isn't. Now, there are a lot of things going on in this scene, and a lot of it is open to interpretation. We don't totally find out what happened here, but Jolene implies that the dairy farm isn't as safe as it seems, also claiming that someone killed her daughter. I've long theorized, and I think the little details surrounding Danny corroborate that Jolene and her daughter were likely invited to or given food from the dairy farm at some point. Or at the very least, Jolene's daughter was abducted by the brothers. My theory is that the family tried to capture the 2, but maybe Jolene managed to escape, hence why Danny wanted to come out here specifically to finish the job. It's interesting to note that Danny shoots Jolene before she has a chance to reveal to Lee what's really going on at the dairy, and his line about it being a waste, well, I don't think he was talking about the bullet. This is all highly speculative.
Yes.
But I absolutely fucking love that this is in here. This episode has so many little mysteries, and I love that this isn't actually resolved. Danny personally seeing to it. And when we return to the dairy, if you go inside the barn, you can actually find a feeding trough in the far right back stall, and it's full of medical equipment and dirty, bloody clothes. I have never before found this. I couldn't believe that this was here. It adds to the disturbing implications a lot, and it's just really creepy. I've always had this sort of mantra with this game where every single time I play it, I find something new, and that is not only incredibly rare for such a linear game, but also a clear sign of the effort put into every little thing. It's also so far proven to be absolutely true. I genuinely do uncover something brand new every time I revisit this game. It's wild to me, but maybe I just don't pay enough attention. Speaking of returning, as we do, it also gets darker in the time sense, with a storm rolling through. If you thought the atmosphere of episode 1 was good, this episode will fucking blow your socks off. It is immense. Oh yes. This may be my favourite area in the whole game. It's certainly not original, but this serene and peaceful farm hiding dark and disturbing secrets is a great time. It's so backwoods, old, forest, creepy words. I don't know. They also finally fixed this visual glitch that happens when you enter the barn. It's getting dark outside, but when you go inside the barn, it's pitch black outside, and it just keeps alternating. Adding more suspicion to the farm, Kenny finds a padlock in the back and says he heard a noise. Inside, Lee finds a whole bunch of machinery and blood, and he's saying that they still hunt and manage it back there. What are they hunting though? Does he know? Okay. It makes you wonder what Kenny thinks he heard, since we end up finding Mark upstairs in a hidden bathroom without his legs. I guess ordinarily he'd be in this slaughterhouse, but since everyone was walking around, they couldn't get him in there. Oh yeah, Mark's become dinner. I suppose it's a little odd to introduce a new character in the second episode just have him immediately die. It's like they wanted that shocking reveal but didn't want any of the core members to die. But admittedly, I kind of understand why. It can't be the kids, or Lily, or Kenny. Can't be Larry because of what follows this. It also can't be Doug since we just saved him and that would make the choice seem meaningless. And it can't be Ben Paul because he also just joined. They must have realized this and were like, oh shit, guess we gotta write a new guy in. To be fair, I like Mark a lot and you get to spend a lot of time with him specifically in the episode. After helping or killing Larry, and then also the brothers, the group leave and happen upon a parked car with some supplies. The ending punctuates this loss of humanity by everyone agreeing to take the stuff, with Clementine saying it's wrong. Where did that come from? When did I mention the loss of humanity? Usually I agree, but this time I went with the others for a reason that I may get into at some point. I don't know if it's entirely relevant. Spoiler, I'm gonna get into it in Season 2 of The Walking Dead. Oh, just you wait. Like 5 hours to get there, probably. The camcorder from before is also now powered by Doug, who tells Lee he needs to see it. Once again, it's Jolene, stalking the group and Clementine specifically. It reveals that the bandits were employees of the Save Lot store, Jolene herself working there, and it's heavily implied that they raped and killed her daughter and maybe even did the same to Jolene, which is grim. But the kicker is that Jolene says Clementine will be safe so long as the bandits continue getting food from the dairy. Whoops. As mentioned, this is usually my go-to favorite episode, but I think most of the enjoyment is uncovering the mystery and all these smarmy details. It's still a fucking knockout episode though. It has easily some of the best moments of the entire series. I couldn't even get that sentence out properly. The first half is like a nice countryside reprieve from the walkers and bandits and mayhem of it all, before the second half just starts dripping and oozing mystery and misery, and it doesn't really let up for the rest of the game. We're well into this apocalypse now, and things are only going to get worse.
I give it 4.5 stars.
Lovely.
Episode 3 is another fantastic addition. What do you expect at this point? The game is just great. It begins with Lee and Kenny scavenging for some supplies, and Lily claims someone is stealing supplies from the group. Lee is tasked with finding out if her theory has any water. Or weight. Or if it's a game theory. Meanwhile, we have another great slower moment where you are able to explore the motor inn and talk to everyone. These sections do so much for the game. Doug feels useless, Ben is on watch, which Kenny laments, Kenny and Katja argue about having to always carry around guns, Lily is seen as paranoid by the group. It's strangely hard-hitting to hear Clementine say that everyone is sad as well. The game also shows its incredible tonal balancing act, as Lee investigates Lily's concern about the supplies with Doug's help, acting as the Robin to Lee's Batman. Anyway, this is such a strange and unexpected direction, made even better by perennially empty-headed Duck actually proving useful, finding the pink chalk used to make X marks, which leads Lee to find a bag of supplies in this grate, confirming Lily's suspicion. Damn, maybe Duck should be Batman. Duckman. That's fun. That's really good.
This made no sense.
Bill says that.
Suddenly, the bandits appear and take everyone hostage, saying that we've stolen from them somehow. They probably just mean we haven't been given them supplies. Lee tries to haggle with them, which produces one of the funniest lines in any of these games.
Well, I suppose we ought to hash out some terms then.
I don't like no hash.
Man, shut up!
I just love it. The delivery is hilarious. I don't like no hash. Oh shit. The place is then overrun with walkers, so the gang escape in the RV, which coincidentally enough is what Kenny wanted to do all along. Also, I think this is supposed to be Vernon's brother that he mentions at some point, right? Yeah, I know.
Actually spoke. How do you know that?
Safe now, Lily turns back to finding the mole, believing it to be Ben. Kenny drives into a walker and it gets stuck under the car, prompting the group to step outside and settle it before moving on. Lily loses it and tries to shoot Ben, but Doug pulls him out of the way and is instead killed. You can either leave Lily behind or take her with, which is what I usually do since it's a more exciting choice. Lily also reveals that Lee was a murderer before all this. I guess Larry told her. If you chose to save Carly, you can of course get ahead of this by actually telling everyone when she tells you to tell everyone, so, you know. And while she has a point, I ultimately like how unimportant Lee's crimes are. It's very obviously a bad thing, but you don't ever judge him or make assumptions about him because you're making all these choices as him. The game doesn't make you feel a certain way about it. There's no flashback revealing that Lee was actually innocent or misled. It's just a thing that happened and it's never really touched on. It doesn't define him. You do. Wow. It's very nuanced character writing, I suppose, and perfectly situates you to see every person in this world by their actions right now today, and not before all this. Lee himself would know that better than anyone. Funnily enough, the game was actually going to include nightmare sequences where Carly or Doug would antagonize Lee on his murder. I guess that's kind of neat, but again, I'm glad that it's just an incidental detail. I don't think it needed to be fleshed out. Also, while it's usually in the form of a random bit of dialogue, the game does bend to your decisions. No, you can't prevent or change the ending, but there's more to it than that. I was absolutely having a different experience here than I would have had I chosen something else, even if most of what was changing was just my reaction and feeling toward it, but that's kind of the point anyway. The infamous opening adage kind of speaks for itself, and it hasn't really done them any favors, but at least in this game, I don't think it's totally unfair. In fact, I think it is fair to say that even in those small ways, most playthroughs of this game are different. Things go from bad to worse, as it's revealed that in the scuffle at the motor inn, Duck was bitten. Not only that, we happen upon an abandoned locomotive which blocks our path. Eventually, if you keep Lily around, she will try to coerce Lee into getting Clementine and leaving with her. Even if you agree to do so, Lily leaves without you and we're stuck. While we would have been stuck regardless because of the train, the consequence of keeping Lily around means that we're now without the RV, so we can't even go back. Either way, for now the game can once again display its pitch perfect pacing, another high intensity moment brought down to the characters just chilling as you wander about. I've already gone over how these small character moments make the game so elite, as I've written in my notes, but it is really worth mentioning at every moment. The game always knows exactly when to bring the pace and energy right down to the ground. The peaks and troughs land so well because of this expertly crafted momentum. Yeah. At least once an episode, though routinely more than that, you are given free rein to interact with the environment and characters in it, which adds so much to the experience. Some of my favourite and most memorable moments of this playthrough were talking to Katja about Doug, how she mentions that we were good friends and that he spent some time in Belgium, where she is originally from. How Katja will mention that Doug is allergic to bees, how he was never fussy with food, but they could never get him to use cutlery. Or how Lee will mention remembering one April Fool's Day where his younger brother filled his mother's tuba with flour as a prank, which I wrote in here thinking I said to Katja, but I actually said it earlier to Clementine. Just because they're memorable doesn't mean I can remember them, I guess. You can even find water and animal crackers around the location and then give them to him. It's just very odd and simple, but ultimately very nice. It's so insignificant and doesn't mean anything, but it feels so natural and real. It's such an underrated element of this game that so many games to this day completely overlook in favor of plot and spectacle and a bunch of shit that just doesn't make you feel anything. It's so forgettable yet memorable. It's this interactive give and take. The game gives you the freedom to fuck around and explore, and you take control of the game to continue the story when you're ready to do so. Compared to some later games that feel like they're dragging you around, The Walking Dead lets you take it all in and then trust that you will be able to find the story when you're ready to progress. And maybe best of all, it's entirely optional. You can completely ignore talking to these people and learning these minute details and soaking in the environment like in a supposed real game. You can just miss things and it will subjectively impact your experience, and it's all in-game, not a cutscene. The game gives, but you don't have to take. In fact, this is what I did on my second to last playthrough. This playthrough was in September 2020 on the PS3. I only did it to get another platinum trophy before my eventual 50th in Modern Warfare 2. Long story short there, by the way, I got the platinum exactly 10 years later. Like, to the fucking minute. And that was already almost for 3 years ago. Oh lord. In that playthrough, I completely rushed through the game and ignored every optional moment of dialogue because I just wanted to get that PNG. I didn't realize how much I had lessened the enjoyment of the game for myself before replaying it this most recent time and doing the complete opposite. It's genuinely night and day, and while we'll surely get into it far later, this is to me the most fundamental aspect of these games that was completely lost going forward. It's why I said at the beginning that with The Walking Dead, it's really all about the little things.
It's the little things, as AJ Styles says many ages.
And this is, again, very simple and obvious. The game isn't super complex. You'll never find yourself asking, man, how did they pull this off? There's no trick or ploy. It's just genuinely good and confident and earnest writing. The Walking Dead is so committed to its narrative and characters in a way that they never really replicated again, which utterly baffles me. This is all further exemplified when Duck is eventually out of time and must be put down. I've never felt emotional at this juncture, but the way Kenny reasons that he might be okay, it genuinely got to me a lot this time around. And I don't know if it would have if not for those minor details that made Duck feel like such a real person. It's still a sad scene on its own, but with the additional baggage that I willingly took on, it really feels like a kid is dying here, and not for shock value or to make you feel like things are dire when they're just not. And when Katja eventually takes her own life at the loss of her sons, I mean, that's just a really fucking bad day, and you feel all of it because the game isn't in any rush to get on with the plot. This is what matters, and the game makes you care every time. I feel like I never see this attention to detail in games for the writing specifically. I also never realized that if you give the gun to Kenny, but don't say anything, he will choose to leave Duck to turn. I've never seen anyone do this before. How does this game still have so many secrets and layers to it? There's also a scene prior to this all where you can mention Herschel's son Sean, which makes Kenny stop the train, and I never thought about Kenny feeling like this is all some form of karma for not helping him. That was a real gut punch to realize in another moment of dialogue I never heard. Anyway, why does Lee's arm randomly start reversing up when you jump out of the boxcar? That's freaky. We get the locomotive a-moving and also meet Chuck, Charles if you're fancy, who is another brief but great addition to the cast. He tags along since we're taking the train and he was living in the boxcar, and he's playing some tunes. Let's hear what he's got.
Where are you from? You live around here?
Georgia boy.
I love that. Beautiful punchline. Oh, swerve!
Plot forever. Wow, how about that? It's also at some point revealed that it was indeed Ben who gave the bandits supplies, believing that they had his friends held hostage or something. That'll be important later, but I love how nonchalantly the game and Ben informs you of this. You don't find out in the moment like everyone else. Ben goes out of his way to tell you at a random point, and you just have to carry on knowing why everything bad that happened. Later, Lee will misunderstand Clementine telling him that Chuck told her she would end up just like Duck. What he means to say is that the way our group is looking, no one is prepared. He has a great moment of dialogue where he says that it doesn't matter what your deal is, you're alive and you have to be equipped to make it. This, as well as a moment from episode 1 with Herschel advising Lee on trusting strangers, are two of the most important pieces of advice that Lee gets in the game, and I think they're two of the strongest themes throughout the series. We're always seeing people who aren't equipped to survive, or people who will betray you for seemingly no reason. So that's something, I guess. That's analysis.
Yeah.
That's analysis. Yeah.
This prompts Lee to show Clementine how to use a gun, which comes back in the next episode if she is with you, and could even result in the death of a character if not. Choices in that, though I've just remembered that this may actually result in a game over screen, so, it's not all perfect. But I actually don't remember also, so, He also cuts her hair because it makes her much harder to grab, as we've seen. Clementine and Lee also hatch a plan to try and find her parent when they get to Savannah, with the main goal being to get a boat. You might say that the Kenny went down to Georgia, he was looking for a boat to steal. I've been waiting since 2019 to make that joke. In fact, I'm sure it's been even longer. Fucking hell. While we're here and talking about boats, I want to mention something because I keep forgetting to add it in here. My old fridge legitimately sounded like this game's main menu ambiance. Like, the stationary, immobile noises that were emitted from my fridge were exactly alike to this game's hums and buzzes and zangs or so. I always meant to record it and get the audio, but then we got rid of the fridge and I forgot to do it. How about that though? On our way, we're stopped by a massive fuck-off tanker hanging off the side of this bridge. It's here where we also meet Krista and Omid. Omid is eager to mingle, but his cat will be pissed. Lee and Clementine then take off on their own little adventure to investigate this oddly placed train station. Like, how would you even get to this? Where do you go from here if you're getting off the train? We detach the tanker with the blowtorch found in the train station as a massive horde of walkers approach, and the episode ends with Lee and Kenny finding Clementine's walkie-talkie still working and a stranger talking to her about having found her parents. Oh, a bit creepy. Episode 3 is just such a bad day, mainly for Kenny. Things just get worse and worse, everything is going wrong for these people, and it's great. It's so riveting. The character dynamics were surprisingly nuanced as well. I thought I recalled Kenny being a massive annoyance if you didn't help him kill Larry, but besides some initial moments, he's actually very normal. I wonder if the initial line you respond with will change that, since I didn't say you slaughtered her dad this time, which in theory would evoke more strong responses. I always remembered it being super restrictive in a way, so even if you sided with Kenny at every point prior to the head bashing, he'd still be super obnoxious in later episodes. But to my delight, he really wasn't. Point is, even if we don't like each other in this playthrough, he's still mostly trying to be level-headed with Lee, and it's nice. Again, there is an inherent trust within the group that is really rare and unique, since it's possible to not like these characters, but you may still trust them. The two things usually go hand in hand, but besides maybe Larry, I'd say I trusted everyone.
I give it 4.5 stars.
Lovely.
Episode 4 is kind of a dud, which pains me to say. It's no exaggeration for me to admit that if Episode 4 was better, this would arguably be my favorite game of all time. Unfortunately, Episode 4 has never really hit the mark for me. Every time I play it, I'm hoping that it will be a low-key banger that becomes one of the best episodes, but it just never does. I'm probably going to be harsher about this one than is fair, so just keep in mind that I still enjoy it, I just think it's a big drop-off from the prior episodes.
It's going to be quite filthy.
Callback.
Yes. It does have a hot start, the group now in Savannah and used as bait for a bell tower popping parkour person. I forgot this character existed, but I do like them. We escape the walkers without Chuck, who distracts them and saves Clementine after Ben has a balls up. I don't mention it later, but Chuck escapes to the sewers and doesn't make it out, but he was quite instrumental in everyone else doing so, especially Clementine going forward. I love that this otherwise totally expendable side character has such a massive reverberation throughout, with the advice he imparted. We then get inside this house with Clementine's penchant for getting into small areas. Omid is resting, Kenny is fiending for some boating. Still, there is a wonderfully emotional moment in the attic as Kenny finds a boy who starved to death and became a walker, remarking that he kind of looks like Duck. He does as well. Most people will likely have Lee take care of it and then you bury the kid with his dog, which is super sad and one of the best moments in the episode. Even this episode still manages to take its time and make you care. This episode may be more than most prior, as it took me 1 minute shy of 3 hours. Quick side note, I was very surprised how long each episode actually was. I don't remember them being nearly this long, but I guess people were right. Newer Telltale episodes are considerably shorter, about half this length most of the time. It also helps when you actually really take your time and don't rush through it for a PNG. While burying the dog, there's also an incredible jump scare of the stranger stalking Lee before running off. One thing this episode does well is a feeling of dread, a feeling that you're always being watched and are never really safe. We finally made it to our destination, but things are arguably worse here, and we don't know what's going to be around every corner. Ho-ho! That's analysis.
That's analysis.
Kenny and Lee head to the riverfront, but boats there are none. There is a big mass of walkers acting as a barricade, a select few propped up like scarecrows, and some really weird and horrific imagery. After a puzzle of sorts involving a quarter in this telescope, we meet Molly, who is ringing them bells to create diversions. I love this as an idea. It's super clever and adaptable to the environment. She informs us that the walker barricade is a place called Crawford, a survival of the fittest type of sanctuary, which I guess is an allegory for classism. The rich are of sound body and mind, hiding themselves away and dooming everyone who is seen as a burden or detriment because of their perceived defects. That is analysis. Or that was analysis, I should say.
That was analysis.
Yeah.
Clementine also appears, which is how Molly knows we're not with Crawford, since there are no kids allowed. Walkers then appear after Kenny's misfire, and Lee is sent down into the sewers. It's here where he meets Vernon and a group of cancer survivors who escaped from Crawford before things got bad and are now living underneath them. Vernon agrees to help Lee make his way back, also being a doctor who can help out with Omid's bum leg. I'll say now that I love Savannah as a city, the claustrophobic and tall alleyways, the archaic and bricked architecture rather, the archaic and bricked architecture. It's pretty good. It's here where I had a thought though.
You got it, friend!
He's in a car.
I don't know what you even say about that.
Everyone feels so much more mean than usual. I get that tempers are flared and the plan for a boat is fucked, but everyone is so much ruder, even in small ways. We weren't really much of a group to start with, but there was trust and respect. Now it's just a lot of petty insults and small annoyances. Everyone seems so damn touchy, and that's the point. Everyone is on their last nerve, and for good reason. But something about it, I don't know, it just doesn't feel totally genuine like it has prior. The group is supposed to be crumbling, but it didn't really land for me in that way. I do like this idea that Clementine is the only one we can really trust. This episode hammers their connection pretty nicely. I also absolutely love that there is just a random ass boat in the shed, in the house that we're occupying. I know this would be a massive coincidence to most, but I think it's just so goddamn funny that it's here, and given the house itself, these people were clearly well off, and it seems like everyone around here had a boat, so why not? Though it's not all great, and Kenny can't start raving, since the boat doesn't have gas or a battery, which leads to the group deciding to stage a plan to break into Crawford and get some gas, a battery, and medicine for Omid. When we finally get to Crawford, there's fucking no one here. Everyone is already dead or a walker. The cancer survivors left, and we're hiding underneath them for months, thinking that people were searching for them or coming to kill them, but they were just dead the whole time, and I think that is absolutely incredible. I love how it's set up like a big conflict that we need to involve ourselves in, and everyone is just already dead. It's so clever to me, but it also feels kind of inevitable. It's a wonderful reveal. This also punctuates what Herschel said in episode 1, having to rely on random people and hoping they will do you well. This massive and strict and totalitarian community eventually fell, and yet Lee's humble little fucked up group is still keeping on. It's also even funnier that they were all about survival of the fittest, and yet the elderly cancer group underneath them were the ones that outlived them. Say what I will about episode 4, the irony is not lost whatsoever. It's dripping from this episode. There's also some good environmental storytelling in Crawford. It mainly comes from this quasi-puzzle regarding a safe combination for Omid's medicine. The way you acquire it is by finding videotapes of the doctor to learn the combination, and the doctor ends up being the same guy that Molly was earlier kicking the shit out of. It's still laughably easy since Logan, the doctor, has the only locker that is actually interactable, but it's certainly more involved than most of the game has been, and I like how it comes back around. It showcases the seediness of Crawford, as Molly was hooking up with the guy to ensure medication for her diabetic sister, as they were at one time living there. We also in other tapes learned that there was a pregnant woman who was forced to either leave or abort the baby because of Crawford's rules, which hits hard for Krista, since she is also pregnant, if you couldn't tell. This even explains what happened to Crawford, with this lady, Anna Correa, going on a murder spree and presumably creating a lot of the walkers. Later, everyone is escaping from Crawford as Ben removes a hatchet from a door to let the walkers in. Now, this is pretty damn stupid. Ben gets a fair amount of hate, or I at least remember he used to, but this isn't stupid in a character way, this is stupid in a writing way. I genuinely do not believe that someone like Ben would see a hatchet in between the door handles and grab it, mainly because I don't believe Ben has the courage to fucking tie his own shoes, so I really take issue with this because it is just really dumb. That's all there is to it. I don't think it's Ben's fault because I don't think Ben would have ever even done this. Either way, Ben then continues to make bad decisions, deciding that now is a good time to reveal to Kenny that he's the reason his family is dead. I'm okay with Ben doing that though, that actually makes sense for him. But also, fair play to the kid for actually admitting it. I know for sure I wouldn't be so dead set on revealing that I got this mustached lunatic's family killed. As the group ascends the staircase, we're presented with a major choice. Ben is grabbed by a walker who has hung himself on the bell. You can either let Ben go or pull him up. I feel conflicted about this. I usually pull Ben up, but given everything that's happened, it would make strategic sense to drop him. There is a great moment in episode 5 if you save him, which you won't get, but I think there's a great juxtaposition with the morals of Crawford. Their whole mantra was survival of the fittest, so do we save Ben because it's the right thing to do, or do we drop him because he's a detriment to the group? In other words, do you hold on to some shred of humanity, or do you let it go, even if Ben is asking us to do so, but the kid hates himself for what he did and isn't exactly in the right mind? All of this is pretty well conveyed, even more so by the fact that the walker that grabbed Ben is actually Crawford Oberson himself, the founder of Crawford. Outside of the classroom where everyone is holed up, there's a picture of Crawford and it's clearly the same guy. So it is again super ironic that despite his attempts to gain control and order over a community, he ends up doing what is generally seen as a cowardly thing, taking his own life, assuming he even did it himself. Not only that, he does it in the bell tower, probably the highest point of the area, so you could argue that he still sees himself as some kind of savior. But that's just me saying words at this point. That's analysis.
That's analysis.
Yeah.
So when someone makes a good point, because it's like we end up laughing anyway. But yeah, no,
Was it a good point?
No,
He's got
like this.
he's got long arms.
He knows how to use them.
Choking is really fun.
Yeah. One half.
So what's the message here? Don't try to save humanity because they'll doom themselves regardless? Not really, since Crawford wasn't trying to save anyone. He just wanted power and didn't care that less fortunate people were dying at his hand. And when it all went to shit, he presumably did nothing to help. This is all just my interpretation, but the environmental and mysterious storytelling here is top notch, maybe the best of the game beside that stuff from episode 2, because pretty much none of this is mentioned in dialogue. No one even notices that this guy is Crawford.
Up the lineage.
I completely agree.
I can't quite put it into words, as I've kind of rambled off topic, but I find the decision to drop Ben at his request alongside Crawford's walker body to be incredibly thematic and meaningful. Kenny even encourages Lee to do so. The question of saving someone based on their usefulness to the group and not their status of being alive is something that I think is quite compelling. It also harkens back to what Chuck said, so I don't ever regret saving Ben because ultimately he is alive. Also, there's another moment in this scene that I've never encountered before, and in fact I didn't even encounter it this time. I got a video recommended to me on YouTube which shows how if you ignore Kenny and leave him in the attic, Lee will say this.
I'll see you when you're done.
Kenny will then repeat this back to Lee when you are holding Ben.
I'll see you when you're done.
Which is just a really great moment. This game truly never stops giving. Even the most minor things surprise, and I'm genuinely amazed how much conditional dialogue there is throughout. Even the little things have their own little things.
And it's the little. He sets off. He's like, no, Rob, no, Rob.
Don't say it's the little
No,
thing.
Rob, it is a little thing. Because he goes, little thing. He's like,
I'm going to restrain myself from mentioning more of these moments and instead link you to the channel I found most of them on. That makes a lot more sense, I think. Hell, maybe I'll have a 6-pack by the time this video's done. But the additional lines of dialogue, the game reacting to you not doing what you're supposed to do, is just neat and adds to that feeling of there always been more under the proverbial hood of this game. When we return to the manor, Vernon tells Lee that he would be willing to take Clementine off his hands, that she'd be safer with him and his group. I'm not entirely sure why he says that, aside from having had a daughter of his own, but it's another kind of bizarre moment. Even without the cancer potentially coming back, the guy probably only has a few years left in him. This was obviously done to set up the final episode, since Clementine ends up disappearing after Lee falls asleep, and you're supposed to suspect that Vernon took her. No one's seen her, and the walkie-talkie is outside of the backyard. Lee goes to grab it, and no matter what you do, Lee is subsequently bitten. The rest of the group will then appear, and you can either hide the bite or show it. I usually show it, which will immediately make Krista and Omi tag along. To convince Kenny, you have to appeal to his family nature, and I'm pretty sure Ben will want to come regardless to try and redeem himself, but he stayed behind in my playthrough. I kinda wish everyone had, and Lee went on his own. That just feels a little more interesting to me. But obviously the game wants you to take as many people as possible because Vernon and the elderly cancer survivors decide to hijack our boat and leave us for dead, so that wouldn't make a bunch of sense if the 4 of them stayed behind, and I presume by this point they hope most of us would want as many of them to come as possible too. I didn't even realize while playing or writing that your choices throughout the game actually do impact here, somewhat. If you're a total dick to Kenny the whole time, I'm fairly confident that even appealing to his family side won't convince him. If you weren't there for him during those pivotal moments, he won't be there for you now, which is again just such great attention to detail. I also have a completely unsubstantiated hunch that how you treat Ben after he confesses to you on the train may impact his decision to help you here. It's similar to something we'll see later in Borderlands, where it is more fleshed out in an obvious and gamified way, which works for that, but here it is suitably subtle. The fact that I didn't even realize that my choices made a difference kind of says it all. And the fact that I realized this and subsequently added it in while writing about a game that is still 9 games away from being talked about in this video is just bonkers. It really does all come back to The Walking Dead, doesn't it? Either way, the episode ends with Lee finding the hospital basement empty, and the episode has a hell of a cliffhanger with not Vernon contacting Lee on the walkie and telling him to carefully choose his next words before it cuts away. Whoa, that's how you do one of them. Overall, episode 4 is still a bit of a dud to me. I think there's plenty of good things about it, but it just doesn't really coalesce in the way the previous episodes have. I like the idea of this foreboding sense of dread and the characters all being in their worst states, but it just rang a bit hollow to me. Like a bell. Ringing a bell.
Oh no!
No!
Oh,
Right.
no!
Like,
It's always been the worst episode, but I couldn't call it bad. And I wouldn't. And I haven't. Episode 5 is a simple and straightforward one, but I really appreciate it. It's kind of like Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2. By this point, it's just been a long time coming, and there's a lot of satisfying emotional moments and payoffs, and it's just very uncomplicated for the most part. I would argue the emotional gut punch is diminished by repeat plays, but that's because I played the episode probably more than any other in this video. You see, I first played this game on my MacBook Pro in 2014, buying it directly from Telltale's website and then later Steam. It was actually the first game I owned on there. Much like The Last of Us Remastered later that same year, I was obsessed with this game. I played it all the time, but for some reason I couldn't unlock the last achievement for episode 5. I tried replaying the episode, replaying the final chapter, starting a new game, leaving Lee, killing Lee, nothing worked, and I basically gave up on getting it for most of 2014 and 15. What did work was a year later in 2016 using my mum's laptop to play through the episode once more at the kitchen table. I'd essentially stolen the laptop at this point because it was more powerful than my laptop. It seemed that for whatever reason the achievement wouldn't pop whilst using Mac. Figured it was worth mentioning, as well as the fact that I own 5 copies of this game, or did. Mac, Steam, PS3, PS4, and now the definitive edition, but that will be important later for legal reasons. Also worth mentioning is the stupid amount of hours I have on this game. A lot of this is legit as well, about 48 hours of it is not. You see, I used to make YouTube videos on an entirely different channel. I've actually been doing on a variety of channels consistently since 2010 or so, and I was doing a walkthrough of the game, episode 2 specifically. I stopped recording right here as we walked with the St. John's, and 13 or 14-year-old me decided it was a better idea to leave the game running for 2 whole days instead of having to wait a few minutes at most to reload the save and begin recording again. I also did this with The Walking Dead Season 2 for absolutely no reason. I wasn't even playing through it for YouTube then. I just left it on in the background, seemingly to inflate the amount of hours. I'd say about 20 of these aren't legitimate either. It's no wonder I'm so obsessed with stats and numbers now. What a fucking freak. Anywho, I was talking about the emotional gut punch, specifically in regards to the ending, and the ending in question is actually the only time I've ever been brought to tears by a video game. And then it never happened on any of my subsequent playthroughs. Though saying that, it wasn't even my playthrough to begin with. My first exposure to the game, before the aforementioned Pro MacBook, was watching PewDiePie play it, and he cried at the end as well, so I don't even fully recall if it was me who was crying or if I've just subconsciously co-opted PewDiePie's reaction. Also Pornhub. Also, I cheated on PewDiePie by watching Tetra Ninja's playthrough for episode 4 because he uploaded it more rapidly. Why do I remember that? Anyway, this episode is just a straight shooter. It's barely 2 hours and it's all character and emotion. I can absolutely imagine on a first playthrough this being the best episode. I absolutely love how it starts as well. Seeing the walkers that followed us on the train fill into the city is such a weird and satisfying thing. It's almost symbolic of us bringing death with us wherever we go, it now catching up to us and surrounding us. Truly, there is no time left. That is analysis.
Okay!
Don't say okay, agree.
That's a very good point.
Wow. That's analysis.
That is analysis.
Yeah.
You don't get that anywhere else.
No, you wouldn't.
No, only here. Don't trust anybody else.
For now, Lee passes out and awakens to Krista, ready to cut off his bitten arm. I usually don't bother going this route, either way Lee is done for, and I prefer him to have the arm, almost as a way of accepting that he will die, but it won't matter unless he finds Clementine. It also adds some great extra details. As the group climbs this ladder...
Hello, everybody!
Hopefully that looked as dramatic.
Lee will once again pass out if you don't cut the arm off. More great details come on the roof of the hospital, as Krista mentions how people used to get allergies. It's so odd hearing people talk about these sorts of things like they're some bygone and forgotten remnant of the past, but I love how the game randomly throws in these lines and moments. For some reason, they just always make me really stop and think about how far gone the world has become in barely half a year, how quickly it all changes and everything you knew becomes obsolete. But getting those brief moments to take a breather and reflect, it's amazing how minor the things that come to mind are. The quality of writing is immediately back. The boy Sean Vanneman just gets those little things that scratch my brain.
He's got it. Those are the little things. I don't know how to
Right.
describe it, but yeah, he's got it.
Oh, baby,
Oh, baby's got it. Yeah.
Back at the mansion, I'm actually pretty glad that I left Ben, because his outburst makes even more sense when you consider that he was beaten up by a bunch of elderly cancer patients who then proceed to steal your boat. It's a great moment of perspective for Kenny, realizing that he's not the only one who has lost people, as Ben explains that he never returned home to his family. It's the first time he truly sees Ben as a person and not a burden that they're forced to lug around. This episode really cements that as dysfunctional of a group as they may be, they seem to care about each other and are united when it comes to saving Clementine. Episode 4 lacked this sense of unity, the way the characters argue and disagree and reason with each other, and then apologize. It just feels far more natural here than it did. People can get mad or have an outburst, but it never feels so severe. You never worry that someone is about to pull out a gun, and if they do, it's probably been heavily alluded to beforehand. Also, I think Ben is generally overhated, because if we're being realistic, the bandits would have probably killed the group long before had Ben not been slipping them supplies. We already know that they'd been attacking, so I think in a weird way, Ben did them a solid. Are you really going to try and tell me that the bandits wouldn't have attacked them again either way, leading to Duck and Koch's death? I don't buy that. I don't buy that for a minute. The group are then ambushed by the Horde, fighting their way to the attic and breaking through a corroded wall into the adjacent house, discovering a dead couple. Kenny remarks that he forgives Katja for doing what she did, but that you can't just give up, now more resolved than ever, to save Clementine and continue living. The fact he has a girlfriend in Season 2 always seemed odd to me, but I like it in this context. He's found reason to continue living other than for the sake of surviving. It's funny that he reappears in Season 2 though, since he blatantly dies in the following scene. Everyone hops this guard railing and it buckles under Ben, impaling him as he falls and breaks his leg. It's bloody grim, and Kenny decides to stay with Ben, ensuring that he won't become a walker. And then Kenny very clearly dies. This was one of the most hotly debated and theorized moments, the discussions of whether or not Kenny could have escaped, and clearly the writers for Season 2 felt the same way, as they brought him back. I love what they do with Kenny in Season 2, but it has never sat right with me that he somehow got out of this alley. Some suggest that he hid in one of these bins, maybe he broke a window and escaped through a house, maybe he got underneath Ben and hid until the walkers dispersed, a la Glenn. Maybe he climbed out somehow. I don't know, but it really seems like there's no escape and Kenny knows it. He isn't trying to survive here. Conversely, if you drop Ben in episode 4, Kenny will jump down this hole to get Krista out. This is fairly open-ended in a way that Ben's really is not. It's pitch black, we have no idea how many walkers are in there. There's also kind of a door and walkway that leads into this building, so if this was your experience, his appearance in Season 2 does make more sense. But I genuinely believe that the Season 1 writers intended for this to be Kenny's end. Maybe this is why they were only credited for Season 2's first episode, and not the remainder that include Kenny. Back to the Ben part though, you can also abstain from firing any bullets in this standoff in the mansion, and if you agree to leave Kenny, you can actually give him your saved ammo here. Add in that one bullet Kenny grabs from this gun, he'll have 6 whole bullets. Unfortunately, I became genuinely conflicted here and completely forgot to give Kenny my bullets, so I just stood there like a damn lemon.
Oh, those are the only 2 options he has. He does neither.
Oh, right.
I'm indecisive. I can't decide.
And maybe this sudden change contradicts Kenny's prior moments, but I like to see it as Kenny believing once again that he's brought death to someone, and in his mind it's only right to give his life as some form of redemption. I don't know, maybe he was just posturing before and can't live with himself knowing that he got another kid killed. And obviously there's a whole rule about how if you don't see it, it didn't happen. But come on man, no matter how you slice it, it just always feels a little cheap to me in hindsight. Either way, the moment itself is definitely emotional, and I love how you're in control as it happens. It's like the game is teasing you to do something when all you can do is watch. The group, in a few minutes whittled down to just the 3, continue across the rooftops. I really love this as well, this idea that the walkers are almost like a tsunami and they've taken to the roofs for protection. It's a great touch.
Tsunami!
Eventually, Lee says fuck it and decides that he's already turning and he just has to get through the horde. He tells Omid and Krista to wait by the train as they'll be Clementine's only hope. Anyway, I usually don't like these types of badass action hero sequences where the good guy just lays waste to a gaggle of throwaway enemies, but it actually really works here. The musical cue and song is great, Lee's lost everyone and everything at this point. The moment is completely earned, and the reason I always leave his arm is because he will grab this shard of glass he stands on, and he just fucking grips the blade until and he just fucking grips the blade until his hand bleeds on it. You can't even feel his arm anymore, it's so fucking metal. And then Lee notices the station wagon parked outside of the Marsh House Hotel, where Clementine's parents always stay when in the city. Lee walks his way into the hotel and finds the specific hotel room after several minutes of walking from door to door. He's confronted by the stranger who was previously stalking him. What precedes is a kind of bonkers moment, as the stranger almost reviews and debates you based on your decisions throughout the game. You're almost forced to justify the seemingly innocuous choices you made. The idea of having some guy hold you at gunpoint while telling you how badly you played the game, especially in a game where it's all an illusion, is such a bold and ballsy as fuck moment. He believes he is more fit to raise Clementine and shelter her from what the world has become, which we kind of see the effects of in Season 2 with Carlos and Sarah. Just as I'm writing this, I realized that, and it actually perfectly resonated in my mind. The whole point of Sarah was to show what Clementine would have become, if not for Lee preparing her, which was also spurred on by Chuck. Oh, that's pretty neat actually. Nice one, Season 2, we'll get to you. Anyway, it's another wonderful bit of perspective, the man explaining that we stole his wagon's supplies, which ultimately led to his daughter and wife leaving him and dying. He made the mistake of losing his son whilst hunting, which prompted this, but that's part of what makes it great. He isn't a villain in any sense. He isn't a mastermind, he isn't an evil person, he's just a guy who fell victim to our incidental choices and suffered as much as anyone else. We love Kenny despite his asshole tendencies, but this stranger lost just as much, if not more, but we weren't around to witness it. I love how it shows how people will up and go mad when they believe their life is over, even if he's not entirely wrong. And how by not making a choice, silence is a valid option, you are still making a choice. On that, it always kind of peeved me that even if you don't choose to take the stranger's supplies like Clementine wanted, the stranger will still blame you, but that makes perfect sense to me now because obviously we understand how it really went down, we saw and did it, just like how the stranger didn't see any of the events that he will criticize Lee for. He's too committed to this idea of Lee being an awful guardian that it doesn't matter. The game almost becomes about how your choices don't matter because no matter what, you're the villain to this guy. It's fucking bananas. I absolutely love this idea of our choices affecting someone without us even thinking about it. Like, yeah, we're totally stealing this guy's shit and it's very obviously not abandoned. We're in the wrong here. This is so much of the brilliance of Season 1 distilled into one scene. There is a moment reminiscent of this in Back to the Future's 4th episode, but they go so much further with it here.
Do I look like a monster to you?
Depends on perspective, eh?
I guess it does.
What a lovely question.
It is a little on the nose and kind of falls into deluded psycho weirdo since he's carrying around his deceased wife's walker head in a bowling bag.
You! What do you want? Head. And I want it now!
What's in your bag, Twaddell? Tell us what's in your bag, you bastard.
But I mostly just think that's kind of silly more than anything. I have nothing but praise for this scene. It's an absolute bombshell and it's maybe the most clever piece of writing in any Telltale game because it manages to circumvent the illusion of choice by acknowledging and playing into it before anyone even realized it was a thing. Fucking geniuses. Wow. Yeah.
This is what we wanted. Yes, I love it.
Wow.
I said something embarrassing.
Anyway, they take care of the stranger and look to escape, but a walker is waiting at the door and doesn't go for Lee. Clementine fairly assumes that it's because he's covered in their blood, so they cover up to escape. It momentarily works, but at the worst possible time, Clementine finally finds her parents who have become walkers. God, it's just another really bad day. 'Cause you had a bad day. Ugh, no.
What a happy, fun time we're all having here together.
Clementine manages to drag Lee's unconscious near corpse into a jewelry store, and the probably unintentional foreshadowing of controlling Clementine in Season 2 commences, as Lee is laid down next to a radiator and you instruct Clementine on what to do. There's great poetry in the scene as you find a Walker cop in the office and can handcuff Lee to the radiator, mirroring the very beginning of the game. I love the way he will slip out of consciousness for a few seconds. The music really brings everything together as well. You then have the choice of shooting Lee or leaving him, which is like picking between something you don't want to do and something else you don't want to do. That's writing. This is one of the only decisions that I tend to alternate on a lot. Sometimes I'll shoot Lee, sometimes I'll leave him handcuffed, sometimes I won't even handcuff him at all and I'll just leave him there. Either way, it's a bit sad. I don't really have much to say about it. It kind of speaks for itself, and I find it most fascinating in how it relates to the very last game we will be discussing in this video. The game then cuts to credits with the now iconic song Take Us Back, which is sure to have you crying if you weren't already. After a brief rundown of your character choices, we get a post-credit scene of Clementine wandering through a field, presumably making her way back to the train at Lee's request. She sits on a fallen tree and picks up a shotgun shell, seemingly for no reason, before spotting two shadowy figures in the distance. Given Season 2, this was almost certainly Omid and Krista, but this ending always confused me. It seemed they were setting up a second season, but then why did the two guys who wrote the game abruptly leave before the second season even released? I'm guessing it was creative differences. Maybe this was only intended to offer some closure after such a harrowing ending, but the scene plays out kinda suspensefully. We're left to wonder if Clementine will be okay and if it even is Omid and Krista. I guess that's fine. The ending overall is a great one. Dramatic, emotional, inevitable, and with a unique introspective redemption arc that isn't totally present for the player, but for the character of Lee himself. I also love that Lee is bitten and dies regardless, which is another strange divergence for a choice-based game, but it emphasizes the threat of the world in a way that overrules the player's inherent want to save Lee by being ultimately unable to prevent it. Did I say anything there? I just read that out and that sounded like I said nothing. Your choice doesn't matter, but the game trusts that you won't care in the moment of it. The final season also juxtaposes this beautifully. We'll get there, and then I'll struggle to make it make sense with words. I think most people will have a certain Telltale game that is their bar of quality and encompasses the criteria they desire. What the game should do, what the game should be, always comparing it back to that or being reminded of how it did it better. The Walking Dead is certainly that for me, as we will see going forward. For a lot of the games post-Walking Dead, I did find myself ruminating on how easily the game captivates and endears itself to you, how confidently and effortlessly it tells its story and weaves these impactful choices. The Walking Dead is basically an ex that you just can't get over, and sometimes you don't even want to. But while you may love and miss that ex, and desperately want them to make a return to form, that doesn't mean there can't still be other great experiences. Maybe not better, but different. This turned into a therapy session, but I suppose it's a good analogy given that The Walking Dead wasn't actually my favorite game on replay, but rather my second favorite. Bet you didn't see that one coming, you fuckers. Then again, I kinda tore into episode 4, so maybe you did. Anyway, the only real bad thing about the game is that I can't replay it again so soon after already replaying it. I can't wait to once again discover a completely new detail that I've never uncovered before. I absolutely adore and cherish this video game, oh yes. And Firewatch was the best game of 2016, so these motherfuckers don't miss and aren't just one-hit wonders. It's a damn shame we won't get any more games from the two. Their next one looked great, but at least we have these two bangers. It's also a shame about episode 4. Okay, I'll stop.